Hello again. In this video I'm going to show you the various methods that I use to fit the whirligigs onto the pole mechanism to allow it to rotate and to keep it fairly safe and sturdy. But before I go into that, I'm going to take the camera outside and show you how I fix the poles. Hello Paddy. I'm going to move the camera up so you can see the pole. The important part is the joint in the middle. What I've done, rather than using one great big long pole, I'll try and get the camera level. Instead of using one great long pole, I use a shorter pole. In this case it's about 5 foot, I would imagine. And then with another roughly 1 yard long, 36 inches or nearly a metre. And then it's joined using a couple of pieces of angle steel off an old shelving unit. And I will show you that more in detail in the workshop. But I find this method quite useful because it means you can easily, just by taking a couple of screws out, take the whirligig down and then take it into the workshop to do any maintenance on it. It's an easier way of fitting them up. In this case the pole is simply screwed onto the fence, but you can fix it in a hedge, you know, bash it into the ground, put a point on and bang it into the ground and put some kind of support. You need a support with a weight of the whirligig on the end, otherwise it'll topple over. They need fixing in some way or other. There's no wind today, so you won't see it working, I'm afraid. But I just wanted to show how the pole's fitted up outside. In the case of this whirligig, you can see I've got just a short pole. It's about 12 inches long. And I've simply screwed it to the front of the summer house, which does the job admirably. I explained just now, outside, I make the poles in 2 parts. And then I can fit the one part up outside, attach it to a fence or a building or whatever. And then the whirligig itself can have a shorter pole that just pops on the top. And the method I use for fitting them, which makes it quite easy, is just using a bit of this angler. And this is actually, it's only cheap, thin stuff, what you make shelving units with. This is some old shelving units. I've put one on there already. And all you do, you simply screw these units onto the pole. This is the bottom part of the pole. Just pop a few screws in. I'll just put the one in now to hold it for purposes of illustration. But normally you'd put one around the other side and put, you know, a total of 4 screws in. And then once you've done that, I know those don't match, but that doesn't matter for the demonstration. Then the pole with the whirligig on, you can simply slot it in the top like that, and then put a further couple of screws in there to hold it, like so. And you can see, oh, you can't see the whirligig's on top there. And then it makes a convenient method of taking the whirligig down for bringing it into the workshop for doing any servicing or adjustments you want to do to it. And it's quite simple to do. And it's just a couple of screws in there. And then also, if you want to change the whirligig, if you've got several of these around the garden, you might want to move them to different positions, and they're perfectly interchangeable. So just measure, you can just see the measurement of the pole if you're interested in that. It's approximately 1.5 inches. That's an imperial, or 40 mil if you want metric. It doesn't matter, you can have whatever size you like, but those are just sizes I happen to have. It's handy size, I use whatever's available. But that's the method I use of actually fitting the poles outside. Next we'll go into how the whirligigs are actually fitted onto the poles themselves. On this particular whirligig, I've simply got a nut here that you take off, and then you can actually lift the whirligig off, revealing the pole and the pivot point on it. In actual fact, this piece here, this rod, is basically just a Hoover agitator rod out of an old upright Hoover vacuum cleaner. I've got loads of these, having worked in the trade for many years, and I always keep, being a scrimper, I keep things that might be useful, and these are ideal for whirligigs because they've got a thread on the end which is normally 1/4 inch, and it's simply a matter of cutting it off, drill a hole in the pole, bash that in to the right distance so that you've got enough to fit the whirligig on top. It depends on the thickness of the base, obviously, and to put your nut on, and it's the job done, really. Now, don't despair if you haven't got any Hoover rods, and I don't suppose many people will unless you happen to be in the trade. There are many other methods and things you can use, which I'll go into in a moment when I've just dealt with this one. Now you'll notice what I've done on the top of this pole, there's a washer on there, obviously various washers you need for spacing and to help it rotate. But I've also nailed a bit of thin aluminium around the top. That does make a big difference because it stops any water ingressing into the end grain, which will rot the pole away. If you put a bit of tin on there, it doesn't have to be fancy. As I said in my other videos, use a bit of an old baked bean can or anything. It doesn't matter, whatever's at hand. You don't want to go and buy anything. Just use a tin. Just cut it with a pair of scissors, it's thin enough, or a pair of tin snips if you've got them, and just shape it round, put a couple of pins in it. You don't even have to nail it actually if you don't want to. If you just bend it round the top, the whirligig will hold it down, the washers on the top will hold it down. Now, as to the actual whirligig, the way it's fitted on there, that just pushes on there. Now obviously, you could just drill a hole straight through the base plate here, shove it on top, job done. But it will tend, the wood will swell up, and it will cause problems. So there's various ways of doing it. In this case, what I've done on this one, I hope you can see this, you can't see it very clearly because I've painted over it, but in actual fact that's a bit, believe it or not, is copper pipe. It's a bit of old 1/2 inch copper pipe. I hammered it flat, I cut it open, hammered it flat, and just put 2 holes in it because it's fairly soft to work on. It acts like a bearing actually, and then that gives it a kind of a bearing support on there to stop it seizing up. The hole through the centre is obviously thicker than the rod, so if the wood swells up it won't jam the thing up, because you want the thing to rotate freely like this in the wind so that it gets in the right position to receive the wind. So, and the advantage we're using copper, I've got the same on the top, I hope you can see this, a little plate there held by 2 screws. It's all painted over so you can't see it now properly, with a similar hole, a little bit smaller than the one on the bottom because of the thread is a bit smaller, and that simply fits on there and acts as a bearing for that pole. I mean, it will eventually wear out, but I mean, by that time the whirligig's probably worn out anyway. And then you just put a washer and a nut on the top, and that job's done. Well, that's the one method. Now I'll show you another way. Now this is another method of fixing the whirligig to the pole. It looks the same, I grant you. There's basically a nut on top and a washer. I'll just take that off and I can lift this off. I'll lift that off, and you can see the same design really. I'll take that off because I can show you this washer's on there. Take that off. That's the little cap I mentioned earlier that I made. That's just a bit of soft aluminium, but it'll do to keep the water out. Now that is actually a piece of rod with a thread already on it, but it's not an agitator rod off a Hoover like I use in the other ones. It's actually a bolt, and all you do, which is another method of fixing, is if you've got a fairly long bolt, as I say, if you're a scrimper and you collect these things, you'll have things like this from things you've taken apart, or you can even buy one if you're desperate. That's a 5.5 inch coach bolt with 2 nuts on, 1/4 inch I think they are, and all you got to do with that is chop the head off obviously and just hammer it into the pole like that, leaving enough thread out to use on your whirligig. So you know, if you haven't got any other rods, then you can use a bolt. It doesn't have to be that size. You can use 5/16 or 8mm or 6mm, whatever. You don't want it too thin because it will bend, but just a bolt will do the job. Anyway, that's another story. So I've just got that bolt hammered into the pole. That little metal piece goes on there. It should do. That fits round. There you go. I've just hammered that around the side. That protects the top of the pole from rotting. And then I've got a couple of washers. Again, these are just recycled off something else. I don't buy them, I just take them off other things. And the whirligig fits on the top. Now in this case, what I've done, you'll notice there's no metal plates on there. But if you look closely inside there, I hope you can see that, there's actually a bit of copper showing, and that's a bit of copper tube. It's a bit of gas piping I think I had. And I use it for sleeves. And it just fits over the bolt nicely, allowing enough room for movement, and again it acts as a bearing surface and stops it seizing up, so the thing will turn round in the wind nicely and it won't seize up. You can pop a bit of oil on it every so often just to keep it, you know, nice and smooth, but I found those are quite successful. So that's another method I use. Now on this German Shepherd whirligig I've made, I've got the similar arrangement. It has got a rod going up through the pole. In this case it's just a plain piece of metal rod that I found. The fittings on the pole are practically identical with some washers underneath, but you notice on the top, I'm going to move the camera in now so you can see, on the top there. All I've done, I've actually drilled a tiny hole through the top of the metal rod, and then I've put a cotter pin through, a narrow cotter pin through the hole, which does the same thing as having a nut on there basically. I've got a washer to protect it, and that just simply fits onto the rod with a cotter pin. I've probably put a bit of copper or brass pipe in there to protect the rod so that it doesn't jam up, because you need it fairly loose on there. So that's another method. There's various ways you can use, but these are just the ways I use. Other people have totally different methods of fitting it there, but oops, that's gone out of focus there. But that's another method you can use, and they all seem to work quite successfully.